What's good, everyone? Welcome back for another video. Today we're going to do a ban list prediction. We just got the new announcement from Bandai that there was going to be a ban list next Friday, and I want to go over what I think is going to get hit, limited, and maybe changed on the upcoming ban list. Let's get right into it. So I'm going to break my list down into 3 categories. Those categories are going to be gimmies. These are going to be basically the things that we really expect on the ban list. Things that are going to be pretty obvious going into our ban list. Hot takes, these are things that I think are likely to happen but are more personal. And then for the last section is just going to be dreams. These are cards that I expect they're not going to change, things that probably won't happen, but I think would be interesting if they did. Going into our first gimme, I think they're going to probably hit Cool Boy or Greymon X. It might be both of them, but it's likely to be at least one of these 2 cards because these cards really allow Black or Greymon X to be a very dominant strategy. One of the big reasons they hit or limit different decks is if a strategy has been prevalent for far too long. And even though this strategy is really just come into its fruition as one of the best decks of our current format, they base a lot of their decisions based on the Japanese meta, and Black or Greymon has been a continuous threat for multiple formats and is still one of the top decks in their current format. It might not be the best deck of their current format, but it's still a high tier contender, and because of this, they are probably going to limit one of the or both of these cards. The next limit I'm very much expecting is going to be the Grand Kuwagumon promo hitting to 1. This card has been a very problematic card since its release, allowing green to access crazy OTK plays, and with the addition of Grandest Kuwagumon, allows them to deal 5 checks because you're able to double swing while also removing your opponent's entire board. This combination of cards is just so threatening, makes for really uninteractive games where your opponent OTKs you and there's not much you could have really done to stop it, unless you just got lucky and hit something in security, which doesn't really make a really good back and forth game between you and your opponent. I think this is a very relevant hit, and although it is a deck mostly designed to counter Black or Greymon in its current form, it's still an uninteractive strategy, and this deck has been a deck for a very long time, and has continued to see play, and continues to see play past this point, even with like almost no new cards. You just play the same strategy because OTKing is just so threatening and efficient for most decks to really even deal with. Next up, I believe they are probably going to hit a Japanese-only card and kind of do a ban similar how they did about a year ago in the BT6 meta, where they limited a card for a future North American format while immediately limiting it in the Japanese format. And that's going to be the new Marcus Damon in the Japanese format. This card basically has a Mega Digimon Fusion type of effect for the Shine Greymon strategy, and is one of the reasons that deck is just dominating out there in their current format. I expect that it will be legal for the Western players for the set it comes out, which is BT12, but be limited going into the BT13 format, because that's where the burst mode support comes online and makes the deck a real powerhouse of a deck. For my next card, this is probably the last gimme, and I even debated if I wanted to put it as a gimme because I'm not even sure if Bandai is going to do this, but I am begging them to limit or ban Weregurumon promo. While it isn't a threat right now, the stocks of this deck have dropped tremendously since the rise of Black or Greymon. That is because Black or Greymon hard counters this deck and prevents them from multi-swinging and prevents them from doing their game plan. But without Black or Greymon to stop this deck is just so oppressive. It builds a stack to level 5, wipes out basically all your security and goes for game in a single turn. Incredibly fast, incredibly aggressive, incredibly uninteractive as it removes your threats as it's doing it. This is just a very problematic deck that I'm really hoping they hit. And I know it's not topping right now, it's not topping in Japan, but this deck is just so problematic. If they touch Black or Greymon, I would be remiss if they did not touch this deck as well. And this is definitely the problem card. It allows you to get multi-swings, extra checks, and is just the big problem card when it comes to Mega X as a deck. Starting off with the hot take section, my first call is going to be Taiki to 1. I believe Crossheart is going to be a very dominant deck without Black or Greymon gatekeeping this deck from being successful. This deck is incredibly aggressive, incredibly powerful, and without the likes of Hades Force really just shutting this deck down, I think this deck is actually one of the strongest decks in the format. It is currently the second best deck, only because it gets just hard countered by Black or Greymon's Hades Force. But if that card is not in the format and they don't really have to deal with that card as much, this deck just can run rampant and just start sweeping over games as a hyper-aggressive strategy that is just so hard for so many decks to deal with, especially since they just keep playing rush cards from hand that are really hard to deal with, since It's hard to deal with Tamers in this game. It's hard to set up defense against strategies that play all of their attackers from hand and don't really have to build a board to do so. For the next limit on the list, I think it might be a more Japanese flavored hit in that Beelzemon is one of the strongest decks out there at the moment. And I think they might just touch the Beelzemon deck in some way. I know for us Western players, the deck hasn't really made any waves in the current format, but when the new Beelzemon starter deck releases, it becomes an absolute powerhouse of a deck. Combined with the BT12 support, this deck is an incredibly powerful engine that just churns through its whole deck, gains a ton of memory, gets a lot of free bodies. The deck is really, really powerful once it unlocks its new support. I think the most unfair cards in the deck are probably the EX2 Beelzemon that allows you to play an Entmon for free, especially when some of the new support allows you to warp Digivolve once you've achieved 20 in trash, meaning you have a recursive cycle of easy to hit level 6s in your deck once you start getting your deck established. If I was to make a wild guess, I think they might limit this Beelzemon card, especially since the deck has new ways to cycle its resources back to its hand and stack cards from its hand to the top of its deck to ensure those resources work. Because you have this recursability with the deck, I think it's still fine to limit this card if they decide to limit anything in this strategy. For my final hot take, I think this might be the first list where they try to unlimit some cards, take some cards off the ban list, and actually allow people to play more of them. For the obvious choices, might be Argomon and Savior Huckmon. Argomon has been a card that really hasn't presented that much threat since it's been limited. It's just been the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th Digisorption target, and right now it is the worst Digisorption target, mainly because the best deck that uses it is the Bloomlord deck, which cannot search it because it is not a plant or fairy. This means the deck doesn't even really want to run this card, even though it was at one point the strongest Digisorption target. And because of this, I think they might bring this card back, and Green could just have a full suite of so many different Digisorption targets if they choose to go that route. As for Savior Huckmon, this at the moment is actually like the least played Savior Huckmon. This one's a little bit more dangerous, as allowing multi-swings is incredibly powerful, especially in the red color, where you have access to extra security checks. But I think because the other Huckmons better facilitate the Jessamon strategy of swarming the board with sisters, it's possible that they bring this off the ban list from 1 to 4. Speaking of taking cards off the ban list, we get into the Dream section, where my first thing on the Dream section, I think they should add a semi-limited list. Cards that you can only play 2 of in your deck. For the first cards of this, I think they could slightly start bringing out Jet Sylphimon and Tommy. Jet Sylphimon is one of the premier healing cards in yellow and one of the best reasons to play yellow hybrid. But that deck hasn't really been a meta force for a long while, partly because Hades Force really stops the deck, and partly because they've just printed better cards in future sets. While yellow has really struggled as a color outside of Massamon and Security Control, I still think it is possible to unlimit this card and provide another control-based yellow strategy back into the format. While Jet Sylphimon has been very problematic in the past, I do think there's room for a hybrid strategy to return, as there are currently no strong hybrid decks, and I don't think this change really pushes them to be a very scary contender. Maybe with the meta slowing down, with the removal of OTKs and the limiting of Blackmore Greymon, this might not be the case, but I do think there is room to open this up into the format. As for Tommy, while this card was super impressive, promoting a very stun-oriented strategy, I think it's okay to start bringing this back slowly and see how it affects the format, because especially with the advent of X Antibody, it's a lot harder to strip things all the way down to 0, because X Antibody gives them that protection that they cannot lose that bottom source. This means that stacks based on the X Antibody option are basically immune to Tommy's effect, and other decks might suffer, but they still have to deal with the consistency issues of how many Kori Kagumon should I play to synergize with my Tommy when I can only play 2 of them. For the last card on my Dreams list, we're going to say that they should probably limit something in the Security Control strategy. If they want to absolutely kill the deck, they could limit Magna Angemon, meaning it's still playable in a Massamon focused strategy, but you really wouldn't be able to play it in a full Security Control style of strategy. If they just wanted to hurt the deck a little bit, and while also giving a little bit of hurt to Massamon, they could also limit Chaos Degradation, because it is the single best removal in the game. But I don't think that card's really that problematic. It's just a very, very powerful card that exists. Anyway, that's going to be it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you think my takes are whack or awesome, please make sure to do the YouTube thing down below and let me know. And I will see you guys in the next one. Peace out. Now, if I wanted purple to be broken, I'd put Eismon back at 4.